Hi, I'm Vicki Bolson, and welcome to Taking Care in Business, a podcast I created out of my passion for using business as a force for good. From environmental practices to social impacts and all that falls within the realm of corporate social responsibility, I'm always curious about how organizations are taking care in business. Well, hello, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about something that I have been reading a lot about in the news. I think I've shared before that Bolson Group, my company, is carbon neutral. But I've been getting these, emails and reading articles about something called net zero. And so today I've invited Mike Smith, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Aclymate. And just so you all know, that's spelled ACLYMATE, right, Mike?
That's right.
Okay. And he also, which I want to talk about this, is the co-founder of a company called Renew West. And this is cool, the developer of the largest restoration project in U.S. history.
Carbon focused reforestation.
Yeah, so cool. So cool. So I think you are really well suited to talk about this. So thanks for joining me today, Mike. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to meeting with you today.
Great. Well, so let's just start off with what I already said I really wanted to talk about, which is what is the difference between carbon neutrality and net zero?
Sure. So just briefly, so carbon neutrality is the concept of what your emissions footprint is, and you buy some offsets in order to kind of make up for that. In my background as in tree planting with Renew West, and where that company is continuing to go is broadly, we were carbon offset project developers. This is a space I'm really well familiar with. And though carbon offsets have within the marketplace have been coming under some increasing scrutiny here recently, they're still and importantly, they should be. They're also a really important part of kind of like our path to our future, where there is no climate future without us doing a lot of these restoration and preservation projects. There's some really big limitations around carbon offsets. The first one is that with perfect adoption of carbon offset projects in the natural world across the entire planet, you're still only going to get to about 20% of the world's current emissions. Two is that carbon offsets have frequently been used by not the most forthright players in the marketplace, folks that are looking to use offsets as a way to kind of get out of taking care of their bigger responsibilities. And so some of the pushback that's been around carbon offsets is like, how do you actually do the harder thing than the more important thing, which is to reduce your emissions, the emissions associated with, your work, your personal life, et cetera. And so what that introduced is this requirement that in order to avoid being seen as a greenwashing company, it's not just enough to do offsets. You also need to do the harder thing first, which is the emissions reductions. And so net zero is the concept of how do you marry these two together, which is how do you both cut your emissions year on year to get to this point where you are down to the most essential emissions that you just can't get away from right now because there's limitations in technology, et cetera. So typically net zero is seen as trying to align broadly with the Paris Climate Accords. And the Paris Climate Accords talk about that we need to effectively be to 90% reduction of worldwide emissions by the year 2050 in order to have any hope of maintaining a 1.5 C total warming future. That 90%, they call it net zero because at that point, there will be enough reforestation projects, forest preservation, grassland soils, mangroves, you fill in the blank, that we will have enough carbon capture from the atmosphere that it will balance out in a way that's meaningful. And beyond that will actually be capturing carbon from the atmosphere. It will actually more than we'll be emitting and slowing it down. But the important part of net zero is the pathway. And very specifically, there's large corporate things like the Science-Based Targets Initiative or the Task Force for Carbon Disclosures and some of these others. But the general idea is that you can't say we'll be net zero by 2050, emit all you want until 2049, and then be yep, okay, we'll magically cut it. There's a harder pathway. And so what that looks like is that roughly Humans have to cut 50% of their emissions every decade for the next 3 decades. So we have to get to a reduction by 50% by 2030, 50% of that. So down to 75% total by 2040, and then roughly another 50% by 2050. It's maybe actually a little bit faster, 55-60% per decade. And
Mhm.
we're already, 3 years into this decade. And so we're behind the 8 ball a little bit on this one. And so the goal here on net zero for any, small to medium sized business, and why we work on it here at Aclymate, is that you have to give people both tools. You have to give them the tools to both reduce their emissions in a way that's meaningful. They can see it, they can move beyond assumptions and get real data to start doing those things. And the responsible part of that is while you're cutting those emissions, those essential emissions right now that you just can't quite get rid of yet, like you need to be offsetting them. But the priority is start with emissions reductions, then go to the offsetting.
Okay, I get it. I That makes total sense. So, okay, that just brought up a lot of questions. So, is this a good example? I was buying a plane ticket for my daughter to come home for another daughter's high school graduation, and they asked me as I was ending my purchase if I wanted to offset, and I thought, "Huh, this is so interesting." I sort of feel like I'm helping them with their carbon neutrality. But what are they promising to do for this up front? Like, and so I didn't do it. I didn't make the donation or whatever because I wanted to go in and do some more research. But to me, that's greenwashing.
Yeah, it's a little bit, sometimes it feels like when you're checking out at the grocery store and then they ask you, like, would you like to give $1 to St. Jude's or something, right? And you're like, well, yeah, I like kids that are sick and want them to be better. I'd want to give $1. But then you also, like, when you dig down, you recognize that they claim that as a charitable contribution, and you're like, hold the phone. Like, no, 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 like, I'm not doing your dirty work. Like,
Yes, that is
if this is really
exactly
charity, you
how
should be doing this.
that's exactly how I felt. Like, it's like a quick, grab without any disclosure, you
Yeah,
know.
so that's one of the problems with carbon offsets, and why in our marketplace we try to give you as much selection as possible, and you can actually see what you're doing. Historically, there's been a lot of opacity to it, and that you don't really know what you're getting involved with, right? There are some airlines that I've seen that have started. I think United, for example, has a way that you can invest in their uh, sustainable aviation fund, which is not a carbon offset. It doesn't really. It's also kind of like, well, no, United, like, you're a pretty profitable company. You should go do this yourself, right? Like, but specifically within kind of the aviation sector, like if you look at like reports from like the Rocky Mountain Institute about like how they decarbonize, there's
Yeah.
like some big like they divided like the 4 quadrants of like the problem into an offsetting scheme known as Corsia, sustainable aviation fuel. The third quadrant was unspecified future tech, and the fourth was question mark. Like, so there's a lot of ways that, like, this is kind of the essential emissions question for like an airline is like they've got to start rapidly decarbonizing. They don't know how they're going to get there yet. Now, the world changes a lot in 30 years. And so, by 2050, hopefully they've figured a lot of this out. Um, but in the meantime, from an individual's standpoint, from a business owner standpoint, one of the things that you should think about is like, what are your substitutes for flying, right?
Right.
Do you
Yeah.
have to do this? Is this truly essential travel? And if it is essential travel, are there lower carbon solutions to it? I mean, even just picking from one airline to the next. Um, um, you may spend more money on one airline, but it may be a more carbon efficient plane. It may be a more carbon efficient route. Eliminating layovers is an important part of that, right? Because most of the fuel is burned in the takeoff and climb to altitude. So
Yes.
there's just a lot of things that are kind of in there, and it can kind of drive you crazy trying to think through all those things. Uh,
Yeah, it's interesting. And I did notice, not this time, but another time. I don't even think I noticed this last time, but another time I was buying tickets, I noticed like an emissions chart, so I could right there on the screen determine which one was the most environmental purchase of a flight. And I thought that's kind of cool. And I wonder, there's just, I don't know. That's it. I know that flying is one of the main things, that we can cut back on, just as is driving. And I do want to talk about some of those things that just the everyday person can do to offset carbon emissions. But let's skip to this whole thing of, so you buy these offsets, right? Which is, I love how you explained it, that the net zero is actually doing things to reduce your emissions, and then identifying what you can't change right now, and then buying the offsets. So Bolson Group, we did this whole analysis with the company we are working with, where we answered questions about how much we fly, how much we travel, how our commute to work, what we eat. I mean, products we use, all kinds of things. And they came up with our carbon footprint. And then they kept track of it, or they gave us an estimate for our payments or whatever. We made monthly payments. And at the end of the year, I asked for an impact report. And the thing that really got me was that I was told how many trees we essentially planted or how many cars we got off the road. But the thing that really was just a little bit of I don't know, what's a disconnect for me was that, where were the trees planted? Like, what kind of cars did we take off the road? It just seems so, I don't know, like out there in la la land. I would imagine people have problems with that unless they know that they are buying offsets in one of your restoration, your reforestation projects. So is that kind of the disconnect for people, that they feel like, I feel like you need to know where you're planting your trees? Like, what are you offsetting specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is, and like this is a common point of confusion, is that like, so the standard unit of measurement for emissions is a metric ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent. And like that, like the unit is TCO2e, and like that just makes people's eyes roll back, right? And
Yes.
so you're
I
like,
mean,
what on earth is that number?
right. I don't need to know that. I need to know specifics,
Yeah, and so then they try to give it to you in equivalencies of like, that would be like the equivalent of X number of trees growing for 50 years. Well, what kind of tree? Where is it at? Like, and so like those equivalencies themselves are an attempt at trying to make something tangible that is fairly academic and quantitative. One of the ways I like to think about it is around. Have you ever heard of like the donut theory of economics?
No, I'm
So the general idea is that,
no.
yeah, so it's this new thing. Like they're like the Dutch in particular are pretty avant-garde in this. But the general idea is, it kind of aligns with like the UN's like sustainable development goals, which
Okay.
is, the general idea is that like there's this floor of basic human rights that everybody has a right to: food, water, shelter, etc. But there's also this ecological ceiling that we can't go beyond. And what I like about that, just as a way to kind of like to create illustrations for like what is your emissions footprint, is to show like how many Earths would it take if everybody lived this way, right? Is to kind of give you
Oh,
like a real sense of like, okay, this is my shared ownership of it,
yeah,
right? You're living the life of, to give you like a great example, like that makes it like really clear. Your refrigerator here in the United States, if it's an average refrigerator, consumes more electricity than the average of 3 Nigerians, right? And so like, just to put into context, like how
like
much
3 Nigerians,
their
just
whole lives,
their whole,
everything that they
yeah,
do,
right.
like,
Okay, yeah, no, yeah, that really puts it into perspective, doesn't
right?
it?
And so you get to those equivalencies, I think, are like more meaningful than like how
Yeah,
many trees, right? Now there's a separate problem to what you're also asking there, which is like, these equivalencies don't mean you're actually planting trees, right? They're just trying to give it to you in a way that like is something that you can kind of like,
yes.
well, I know what a tree looks like. That much tree, right? Um, but there's also the offset, and usually the offsets are like, especially if it's a corporate offset, they're just kind of like, here's trust us, we're buying this bundle, right? And so there's a lot of reasons for that. But generally it just helps them in their procurement, that if they don't have to like explain too much about that. And so um our preference, and most of our customers' preference, is that they get to see where they're buying their offset from. They get to know the offset project. They can actually go find it on a map, and you can learn the story of it. And it doesn't have to be just about planting trees. It could be about forest preservation. It could be about like cook stoves in Africa, which has like some really strong, developing world, attributes, and then also like women's health issues, because it's typically, women in the developing world that are doing these cooking activities. And so, just there's a lot more about like an offset project than pure accounting of just like what's my missions here, how much do I need to buy. There's also like these, they call them co-benefits that you really that resonate at different amounts with different people.
Yeah. Wow. That's helpful what you just explained. I would rather know that, you know, I don't know. I don't want to know that I use just in the course of using my refrigerator that is equivalent to three Nigerian people's life of emissions. That is like that's overkill. Like that, I just need to unplug my fridge right now and go to a cooler or something.
Well, so that's the donut theory of economics, which is like the reason they don't use that much electricity is because a lot of Nigerians don't have refrigerators or
Right.
lights, right?
Right.
And so like the donut theory here is like, no, they deserve that. Like
Yes.
they have a minimum quality of life that they deserve. And it's like they need a refrigerator, right? But like so you don't need to go unplug your refrigerator. But maybe if we could think a little bit about like some of the things where we do have a lot of waste, and just be like, you know what, every time I don't do this wasteful thing,
Uh-huh.
like, I'm doing a little bit more of my part. So those folks that don't have refrigeration in their lives
Yeah.
can have it, right? Like we all have to kind of like, there's a little bit of a shared responsibility for us all to make it there.
Absolutely. I have tried to commit to 10 new things every year that I'm going to do. And I have to kind of dig deep and get obscure, like I'm trying to think some of them this year. I mean, kind of the basics, of making my own cleaning supplies, unplugging things when I leave the room, which is a hard one to do,
Yeah.
but like there you can really just start digging deep, and so let's talk about that a little bit. I know from the carbon neutral assessment that we did to arrive at our, carbon neutrality. Um, we had to answer questions, and my whole team came to me afterwards and was just stunned by the things that we had to answer. So it is kind of shocking. But when you really think about it, they make sense. Things like, how much meat are you eating and things like that. Like you're like, what? How do I figure that out? And why does that matter? And then you think about it and you're like, oh, of course it matters. And so there's what we eat, what we drive, how we travel, how we, work. I mean, are we driving to work, working from home? Tell me some of the other, like, give a few tips on things that people can do to really address the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is you probably have a lot of assumptions, but you should stress test them a little bit. And so find something that helps to, if you've already done a climate accounting, you've identified this, but you haven't, get a baseline, figure it out. One of the things we pride ourselves on Aclymate is having a very affordable, very approachable. You don't have to have any climate expertise. You just have to show up wanting to learn, and it
Yeah.
doesn't take very long. It usually takes about 10 minutes to onboard, and then it's about 5 to 10 minutes a month to use the software. That's a great first step. You don't have to solve the world's problems. You just need to start to figure out what your footprint is as a business. And then we're also coming out with an individual calculator as well to help people with that. That individual calculator will be free, by the way, too.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw that on your website. That's super cool.
um, so super excited about that. In general, um, one of the big things that an individual needs to think about is electrify everything. So one of the places that in our economy that's decarbonizing the fastest, now that renewable energy is not only like price competitive, but actually price advantaged, like it is, it's in most cases in the United States now, it's cheaper to install new solar or wind projects than it is to maintain an existing coal plant. So because of that rapid decarbonization that's happening there, all the things that you use for that don't use electricity but could, you should. So heating, water heaters, for example, if transportation. So if you can afford an electric vehicle, and they're actually pretty affordable if you look for the right ones. I have a little 2017 Chevy Bolt and I love it. Like that's a really great way to like immediately get some like big steps in there. Even if you were to plug your electric vehicle directly into a coal power plant, just the efficiencies of electricity versus an internal combustion engine, that alone is probably more efficient than the vehicle you're driving.
Huh.
And electricity is getting cleaner every day.
Yes.
So that's a really great first step. Um, Diet is a big part of it. And you don't have to, go full vegan and like and worry about that, but like my wife and I, we like to think of ourselves as like part-time vegetarians.
Yeah.
We eat meat like 3 times a week, by the way, it's good for my heart. So like it works out really well. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, my blood pressure's down. So
When
it's
you go
great.
to a restaurant, but only cook vegetarian at home.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe only eat week on the weekends, or
Yeah.
like I'm still gonna have like a nice ham for Easter,
Easter. Yeah.
but like most of the time, like I'm eating vegetables, and that's okay. That's good. Grow a garden.
Yeah.
So diet's a big component of that, and then just the things that you buy have a lot of emissions associated with that. And so that old adage from Earth Day in like 1970 of reduce, reuse, recycle, like that really matters. Like reduce the things that you're buying, try to buy things that last, spend the money up front. Fast fashion, for example, is a terrible idea. Buy clothes that last for years, and then when they develop a little bit of a tear, see if you can repair them. you know you'll
Yeah.
have nicer clothes, it'll all work out in the long run, you'll save money, as well. But try to reduce the amount of things that you buy, as well. What doesn't matter as much as a lot of people will think, the carbon emissions of your food are not so much about like where they're grown as much as what they are, right? So less meat, because for example, it takes 40 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of beef. It's like 3 to 5 pounds of grain for every pound of chicken, right? If you can just eat that, that is just a huge degree of efficiency if you're just eating that grain or vegetable equivalent itself. Um, and so like if you're buying produce that's actually shipped to you from Chile, that is probably better than buying beef that was grown across the street. There's a lot of things that are kind of counterintuitive about like,
Interesting. Yeah.
where it all comes from. Either way, what I love about what you're doing, Vicky, is that you kind of pick like a few things to do every year. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to tackle them all. Like this net zero is a journey,
Yeah.
right? And so like start with making your own like net zero commitment. Start with figuring out what your footprint is. It doesn't take that much time, and it'll get you to thinking about it. And then
Yeah.
pick 1 or 2 things that like are just small behavioral changes,
Yeah.
and that gets you started.
Yeah. And I try to encourage people to do that because I honestly just I feel better, I feel better on a daily basis when I go collect, when I get my dog's water from the rainwater I collect, or I hang dry my clothes instead of using my dryer. I mean, I sort of feel like a little pioneer lady over here sometimes, and I get teased quite a bit, but I'm not even that hardcore. I have somebody at my office who's going to be editing this, and we call her our homesteader. She is so committed, and she gives us all wonderful ideas, but it all does matter, and it's really scary. It's really, really scary to think what needs to be done. And
Yeah.
we have to all be a part of it. Okay, I want to segue to my final question, which is okay, so how Acclimate works. I know you have the free assessment tool, which is fantastic. I know you can get like a demo and you can talk with a person complimentarily to gather information to see if that's a fit for you. Early in the conversation, you talked about how the importance of net zero is that you're working to reduce what you can while offsetting. So, what are you guys doing in the net zero space? Like, are you consulting with companies to help them figure out that while they're also, you know, doing their offsets? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So the problem that we saw is that a lot of people will spend a lot of money with consultants, to do just kind of the baseline accounting. And at the end of the day, like they're usually several $1,000s the poorer. They have a nice little report, and maybe they see the consultant a year later, but they have to kind of budget for it. And that there's a couple big problems with that. The first one is that the consultant's doing a lot of things that can really be automated, and they're smart people that like can actually like once they get like the numbers, then they can do the advice part of things. And they don't really love that work. So we thought we can automate that, and that's what we did with Aclymate. Is a lot of like, how can we collect this information in a way that like you don't have to have any expertise, you don't have to have a consultant come in, much more affordable for kind of like your getting started point, right?
Yeah.
And so we part of that is that we've tried to design the software in so a way that we can kind of almost like incept into your brain like where your emissions are coming from in really high color, like, oh, okay, that's purple, that's a lot of office emissions, or oops, that's orange, that's a lot of operational emissions. And so you can look at it without having to like get very quantitative, right?
Oh,
So that's the first thing that we do. um, we do have a concierge service if people are looking for kind of like that ongoing like kind of consulting aspect, still like cheaper than a consultant
yep.
as well. But we also see this as something where we can work hand in hand with a preferred consultant, where this can be their tool, for you to ongoing like see it. That fixes the second problem, which is the ongoing, which is like if you say, okay, well, we've got to reduce this. Well, the consultant generally is not diving down to like, okay, who's taking these flights, or who's got the long commute, like actually figuring out where that is. And you can start to see like, okay, well, Jack really, doesn't really need to drive an F-150 40 miles one way. Maybe he can carpool with Anna, or maybe he can like, it actually turns out there's a bus line there. We can buy him a bus pass, and that's just about as fast. Like there's like things that when you start being able to like pull that apart and look at the data
Yeah. Yeah.
and attribute it, and then you get to see like how that changes. You actually can track that and not be like, okay, well, I'll see what my emissions are next year. You can see what it is next month.
Ah, that's super cool. I would imagine too, can you pull it your progress on a monthly basis? Is it like a dashboard like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see your
Okay.
progress on a monthly basis. You can stack by quarters. You can, if you want to dive into the scopes, you can look at it by a scope analysis. You don't have to, but you don't have to know anything about it. You just know we prompt you for like what we need, and as much as we can, we automate it.
Well, and I just want everybody who's listening to know that as someone who's B Corp certified and going through a recertification, I'm raising my hand. It would be wonderful to be able to pull this kind of information because I'm, contriving it from different resources that I have to measure things. That's a total benefit of the service of Acclimate. I sound like a commercial right now. Um, but I mean, like seriously, like I get it. And then the second one is just being able to pull reports because investors are looking more and more at investing in companies that are measuring their impact. And to be able to do so on a base, like a regular, a moment's notice, and to follow up with an updated report. I mean, like there's so many things that can be done with this information. And it is affordable because I was looking at it and I think the concierge service was like, and maybe this is just an entry level concierge service, but it was 500 a month. Is that what I read?
Yeah. So right now we charge for access to the software. If you want to have the ongoing analytics and you don't need any support, that's $1 per employee per month. So incredibly affordable.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
and then if you want the concierge service where we'll do the data entry for you and then give you some reporting and some a little bit more hand holding, that's $500 a month. So very affordable.
Good Lord.
Uh,
$1 an employee per month.
yeah, it's going to be going up soon. So if you're interested, now would be the
Yeah,
time
I got to
to
get on the
jump in
phone
on
with
that.
Travis.
So yeah, talk to Travis. Vicky will take care of you. And one of the things that we will be replacing or be adding to is an additional tier in the near future with integrations where we'll be able to pull most of this information in automatically. And so as we access those data sources, that'll cost a little bit more money. We'll announce that later. But yeah, love making this like a really approachable, affordable thing. We've helped a ton of B Corps. Like they're like when we did our initial customer discovery before we even started programming, I talked to a lot of B Corps and we love helping helping solve problems for B Corps.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. I love your company. Congratulations on such a cool and much needed platform for so many. I mean, you're going to be hugely successful, I think. So, Thank you for
you're
coming on.
yeah, absolutely. Like one little line that I like to pull from the IPCC report from 2018 is that like um every fraction of warming matters, every like year matters, and every decision matters. And I think that's like really important for all of us. And that's kind of the animus of Acclimate is like, how can we give decision making, like real honest decision making, to the rest of us? And so I'd love to help everybody with that. And your lips to God's ears. I hope we're as successful as you want us to be, Vicky.
Yes, I think you will be. It's important, and I hope everybody will at least go to your website and check it out. Aclymate.com. So
That's right.
acclimate without spelled differently. Very
Yeah.
clever.
Unfortunately, that URL was taken, but I really like that verb, and so I was like, okay, we'll tech bro it up a little bit
Yeah.
here in order to get a discrete URL. But that's what
Yes.
we do. That's who we are.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on and just letting everybody know a little bit more about not just, your tool, but what net zero is. I mean, I was just befuddled. So I feel much more knowledgeable now, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me, Vicky.
You're welcome.
Taking Care in Business is hosted by Vicki Bolson, produced by Joe Perrin, edited by me, Morgan Hartman, and promoted by Addie Miller, who are all members of the Bolson Group team. If you enjoyed today's episode and you'd like to help support our show, please follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest news and updates, be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Taking Care in Biz, that's biz with a Z, or by going to our website at takingcareinbusiness.com. If you have any questions, comments, or have a guest suggestion, you can email us at info@takingcareinbusiness.com. Thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for our next episode to learn more about using business as a force for good.